Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really plunging into something significant, something shaping, well, our time to future and even the global power map. We're talking about Australia's new critical minerals strategic reserve. And it's definitely not just about digging stuff out of the ground, is it? It feels much more strategic.
Oh, absolutely. This is a calculated move with ripples going worldwide. And we've got a great source to guide us this report from May 2025, Australia's Strategic Reserves for Rare Earths and Critical Minerals. It's pretty comprehensive.
Right. Consider it our blueprint for today. It digs into the policy, where things stand now, and crucially, the potential global impact.
Exactly.
So our mission really is to understand why Australia is doing this now. What is this reserve exactly? And, what could it all mean for technology, for the green energy shift, even for international relations? I think there's some surprising bits in here. We're aiming for those aha moments.
Definitely. And I think the best place to start is probably the why. Why take this major step? The report lays out a few key interconnected drivers. It's a mix of global risks and strategic opportunities for Australia.
Okay, let's unpack that why. First up, the report hammers home supply chain fragility. It mentions China processing something like 90% of rare earths. That's huge.
It's massive. And, as the report points out, things like the pandemic, U.S.-China tensions, they really exposed how vulnerable things get when one country dominates such a critical step. It creates massive risks for basically everyone else relying on these materials. Think
Yeah.
about potential disruptions halting whole industries.
Yeah, it's like having all your eggs in one very strategic basket. And that leads straight into economic sovereignty, doesn't it? Australia wanting to protect itself from price shocks or, worse, export controls.
Precisely. It's about taking back some control. By having reserves and building their own processing, they're hoping to shield Australian industries, ensure they get what they need at ideally more stable prices, makes them less vulnerable to those global market swings.
And it's not just the economy. National security is a big piece here, too. The report mentions things like guided missiles, radar systems. These minerals are essential for defense tech.
Absolutely fundamental. These aren't just for phones and laptops. They're critical for modern defense capabilities. So securing access is, well, it's core national security for Australia and its allies. And that same logic applies to the energy transition, too.
Which is the next big driver, right? The
Yeah.
global push to clean energy, EVs, wind turbines. They all need huge amounts of lithium, cobalt, those rare earths.
Exactly. And Australia sees this huge energy shift, not just as a chance to sell raw materials, but potentially to build industries downstream, battery making, that sort of thing. The reserve is kind of the foundation stone for that ambition.
It also sounds like Australia isn't going it alone. The report talks about geopolitical alignment, the QAD countries, US, Japan, India, and interest from the EU as well.
Yeah, it's definitely part of a bigger picture. It mirrors what the U.S. and Japan are doing with their own stockpiling efforts. It's a clear signal, really, a coordinated move by these partners to diversify away from that heavy reliance on China for processing.
Okay, so the why is clear: strategy, security, economy, energy transition. Now let's get into the what. What's actually in this reserve? What minerals are we talking about?
Well, the initial list is quite specific. You've got key rare earths, neodymium, praseodymium, dysprosium, terbium,
Yeah.
essential for magnets and EVs and turbines. Then the battery metals, lithium, cobalt, nickel, graphite. And another group for high-tech and defense, vanadium, gallium, hafnium.
That's a broad spread. And how are they holding these? Is it all just piled up somewhere?
It's a bit of both, actually.
Yeah.
Physical stockpiles, yes, but also what they call offtake agreements. So the government either holds the physical minerals or locks in future supply through long-term contracts with Australian producers. Gives them immediate access and long-term security.
Right. And the money. This sounds expensive. How's it funded?
It's a significant investment. $1.2 billion initially, coming from the National Reconstruction Fund, the NRF. And they're using what the report calls a blended finance model.
Blended finance. What does that mean in practice?
It means they're using a mix of tools. Government loans for projects expected to pay back, direct equity stakes where the government invests alongside private companies, and grants for riskier early-stage stuff. It's all managed together with Export Finance Australia and the Critical Minerals Office. The idea is to share risk and draw in private money.
Okay, so the money's there, the minerals are listed, but
Right.
you need processing, right? You can't just use the raw ore. What's happening on the infrastructure front?
Yeah, this is absolutely critical, and there are some major projects highlighted. Iluka Resources' Eneabba Refinery in WA is a big one, a $1.8 billion project, partly government funded. And the report stresses It's said to be the first major rare earth oxide refinery outside China.
Wow, first outside China, that's a statement.
Yeah.
Any others?
Linus Rare Earths in Kalgoorlie is also scaling up NdPr neodymium and praseodymium production. And VH Ltd in Victoria got the green light for a new rare earths and zircon mine. So you're seeing activity across different states and different minerals.
The report also mentioned common user processing facilities. What's the idea there?
Ah, yes, that's quite innovative. The first one's planned for Townsville in Queensland, initially focusing on vanadium processing, for
Wow.
flow batteries, big energy storage. But the plan is to expand it to handle other minerals too.
So what's the benefit of a common user facility?
It basically gives smaller mining companies access to R&D, pilot production testing, capabilities they probably couldn't afford on their own. It lowers the barrier to entry, encourages innovation, and it's also backed by government as a way to boost regional jobs, helps build the whole ecosystem.
Right, not just relying on the big players. Makes sense. Let's broaden out again. What are the bigger impacts? Economic, strategic, environmental.
Economically, the idea is that having these stockpiles helps stabilize costs for Australian manufacturers, battery makers, solar panel producers, defense firms. That stability could then encourage more investment further down the chain, actually making the cells, the magnets, in Australia. Yeah. The report even hints at maybe an Australian critical minerals exchange one day.
An exchange, interesting. What about the cost to the taxpayer? Is this just government spending?
Well, the Resources Minister, Madeleine King, is quoted saying the aim is for it to be self-sustaining by the mid-2030s. The idea is, through smart management, long-term contracts, maybe leasing some minerals, selling strategically when prices are high, it could eventually generate a return.
Ambitious goal. Requires some smart trading and long-term stability, I guess.
Definitely. It's a projection based on certain assumptions about the market.
And with all this mining and processing, what about the environmental side? ESG.
Yeah, the report makes it clear that ESG standards are mandatory. That means proper indigenous consultation, land use agreements, rigorous environmental impact assessments tied directly to getting any funding. Plus, there's a push for a circular economy plans for rare earth recycling incentives starting around 2026. They seem very focused on addressing the environmental footprint.
So responsible sourcing is built in, which is crucial. Okay, zooming out globally again. How does this position Australia? What's the big picture role they're aiming for?
Well, Australia is already a top 5 producer for things like lithium and zircon. But this whole strategy, the reserve, the processing, is about moving up the value chain, becoming not just a supplier of rocks, but a reliable, stable, diversified supplier of processed materials. Someone used the analogy, like the Switzerland of critical minerals.
Huh. The Switzerland of critical minerals. I like that. Stable, reliable, ethical.
Exactly. That seems to be the brand they're building. And they're actively expanding who they sell to, beyond just China. Japan's a key partner, the report mentions, deals with Sojitz, Georgimek. Europe is a big target, especially with their own Critical Raw Materials Act. And India and South Korea, too, particularly for batteries.
Makes sense. But surely there are challenges, risks. It can't all be smooth sailing.
No, absolutely not. And the report acknowledges them. Processing, especially for rare earths, is very complex and very expensive, capital intensive. It might need ongoing government support.
What else?
Finding enough skilled workers is another one. Specialists in things like hydrometallurgy, people who understand the complex ESG compliance. There's a shortage. Geologically, Australia doesn't have everything. Cobalt, for instance, isn't abundant there. So international partnerships will still be needed. And the big ongoing challenge, balancing resource development with indigenous land rights and sovereignty, that needs constant, careful management.
Right, those are significant hurdles. So what's the timeline? When do they expect all this to be up and running? What's the outlook to, say, 2030?
The report lays out some milestones. 2025, task force set up, initial funding flows. 2026, they expect to have stockpile sites picked out, first supply contracts signed. 2027, should see full-scale refining startup at Eneabba and Kalgoorlie. 2028, the Townsville Common User Facility should be operational for multiple minerals. And by 2030, the goal is to have the reserve fully stocked and that self-sustaining financial model taking shape.
So a busy 5 years ahead, lots of key steps happening relatively quickly.
It is ambitious, but it's a phased approach.
Yeah.
These next few years are definitely critical for getting the foundations right.
Okay, well, this has been incredibly useful, really getting under the hood of this strategy. To wrap it up, what's the main takeaway, the single most important thing for listeners to grasp about this?
I think the core message is, this is much bigger than just mining. It's a major strategic play by Australia. It touches their economy, their security, their global standing. It's about reducing supply chain risk, boosting domestic industry, and positioning themselves as a reliable, ethical player in this absolutely critical minerals market. It's a strategic tool, really.
And that aha moment for people listening?
For me, the aha is grasping the scale of the ambition here. Australia is seriously positioning itself to be a stable, ethical alternative to the current, dominant forces in critical minerals. If they pull it off, it could genuinely reshape global supply chains, kickstart their own green tech industry. It's potentially transformative for them.
It really is a huge undertaking. And maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. As this global scramble for critical minerals heats up essential for everything from our phones to green energy, what kind of long-term geopolitical shifts might we see? And what role will Australia, trying to be that Switzerland of minerals, ultimately carve out for itself in that changing world? Something to keep watching. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.